I want to start with lessons learned. One of them that we were talking about this morning when we were doing our workout was making decisions on blended reasons, or having like a blended strategy for how we're going to win doing these 5 things, and why that sounds like a good idea to the average person, but is actually a very bad idea. Can you explain that?
Check out this interview with Palantir founder Joe Lonsdale. It's a banger. Features some juicy insights on Palantir and Peter Thiel.
Yeah, and I wrote this piece online, like 9 lessons from Peter Thiel. I sent to all of Palantir. That's been like sent to all of my other companies as well, and it's one of my favorite pieces, and that's one of them. And it's one of these logic things where usually there's like one reason that dominates everything else, and that's just the nature of the world. Is that when something's successful, it's kind of like the power law rule, right? Like in a venture capital like fund, even there tends to be one thing that's successful that's like bigger than everything else, and that's true inside of companies as well. It's very unusual, like extraordinarily unusual, for there to be like 2 similarly equal like products or revenue lines or something like that,
right?
Especially early on in a company. So usually, if you think you have like 2 or 3 reasons for doing something, or 5 reasons for doing something, what that means is that you actually haven't figured out.
You have no
actual reason.
You have no strong reason.
You have no strong reason yet.
Yeah.
Like that means you have 5 weak reasons, which is not good. You want to find like what's like one really strong thing you're driving towards. And that's how startups work. And it's a really seductive trick. I mean, first of all, you have to be taking a big risk to even do a startup, it feels like, rather than like, a lot of people like do incubators because they're like, oh, I don't want to do one company.
Right.
I'm going to do 10 companies.
Right.
And like, by the way, that's like much less likely to have big success because you're not focused. So even within a company, they're trying to do the same thing. They're trying to be like, well, here's 5 ways I'm going to make money. And like, no, man. If you really want to do a company, figure out the way you're going to make money. And that tends to be how it works,
And that applies.
This highlights the power of singular focus. Instead of chasing multiple paths, honing in on one strong strategy often leads to exponential results. Palantir's growth reflects this mindset, sticking to what drives real-world impact.
To revenue streams. So 8 revenue streams means you probably don't have one awesome revenue stream.
Exactly.
Growth strategies. If you have 7 things we're going to do for growth, means you haven't figured out
which one's actually the one that's going to work.
The one that's going to just compound like crazy.
And it may change
right.
over time, but what's the thing that's working now that you're
now.
pushing on? Yeah.
And then the other version of that is blended reasons for doing something. I think I read once that Reid Hoffman kind of uses the same philosophy, and he gave the example of, if there's like a trip to China and I'm deciding, should I go to China? It's far away. It's going to take 2 weeks. And should I do this trip? He's like, and my chief of staff came with like a list of pros and cons.
Yeah, it's like multiple pros.
Multiple pros and then a couple of cons. That's almost impossible. It's a guaranteed way to make mediocre decisions, is to do long blended lists of
If you don't have a key reason to be there, like stick to your work. Yeah.
Exactly. That's what he said. He's like, if we don't have one reason that alone is worth doing, then we should just say no. Is that something you do?
Reid was one of the key minds at PayPal, of course, with Peter Thiel and others. So Who knows who actually came up with these ideas? It may all just be Reid's ideas that I'm recycling, but he's a very smart guy.
This mindset eliminates mediocrity. Instead of weighing endless factors, finding one decisive reason ensures sharper decisions. Palantir's ability to concentrate on what matters most is what sets it apart in an increasingly chaotic landscape.
Well, I say the message for mine now. So I think that's the best way to, the highest compliment is to meme an idea and to let it spread. And so Peter's helpful with that. He's, what are some of the other things? Like, do you remember, even at the beginning, one thing I kind of wonder is, you've been around a bunch of special people, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, all this stuff. Is it clear in the early days? Like, do you remember the moment where you're like, oh, this person's kind of different? They are that 5 standard deviations in intelligence or conviction or whatever.
One of we all try to like set strategies for ourselves and goals and whatnot. And like, I remember in college, I thought, wow, this is a really good opportunity at Stanford to reach out to a bunch of successful people and kind of learn from them, see who I admire, who I want to be like. And, I've met some of the legends of global macro finance who I'm still in touch with. I met a bunch of other big business people and run Fortune 500 companies. And Peter, to me, had by far the most interesting intellect. He was clearly just one of the smartest people I'd ever met. And he was interested in some of the same things I was interested in. He'd taken some of the logic farther than I ever had. So I always learned the most from conversations with him. So that to me was one of the reasons he was the most attractive to try to work with and try to build with.
What stands out here is the deliberate effort to seek out mentors and build relationships with intellectual heavyweights. It's a reminder that success often starts with surrounding yourself with people who challenge your thinking and expand your horizons.
And so before you start multiple other companies, you do Clarium, which is his hedge fund, I guess is the way.
Global macro fund, yeah. It's like the most fun part of finance. There's lots of parts of finance. Finance is like all sorts of areas. Global macro is looking from like the highest possible perspective at everything going on in finance. It's like the bond yields around the world, the flows of money around the world, how equities are being valued. They basically just from very top down, like what is happening in the world of finance and how do you map it out? And you look at relationships and you understand, of course, the Australian currency is going to be really correlated with the price of metals, and there's different ways in which they can get way off, and you can create a regression trading system if they're way too far off, where you can make money based on the reversion, right? But then you say, oh, normally I would trade this, but actually this is happening because China just invaded this thing over here, so actually it's not a good time to do it. And it's just really, really fun map of the world. And we were really interested in long dated oil prices and what was happening with oil. We were very interested in how Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which are the two big giant housing groups, they'd gotten to be much, much bigger in the U.S. in the early 2000s. And they had these giant mortgage-backed security portfolios that are worth trillions of dollars. And they had to hedge these portfolios, basically. And I won't go into all the details. It's a little bit esoteric. But based on how they were hedging their portfolios was completely changing the global fixed income markets, completely changing the pricing of bonds. And we found some really interesting ways to do things there. My favorite story, though, I'll give you is just to give... So we were working at the hedge fund. The market's open. We're in San Francisco. We're in 555 California, right? It's that big building downtown. After 9/11, I think Peter had a parachute in his room. I always told him he should have parachutes for us too. But anyway,
there's one parachute. Okay,
that was just a joke, but it's probably anywhere. But no, so it's like school office on the 42nd floor. And the market's open at 6:30, so the traders are supposed to be in at 6:30. Except the first Friday of every month, you had to come in at 5:30 because the non-farm payrolls come out still now the first Friday of every month at 8:30 a.m. on the East Coast. And it turns out this is a very important number because it shows you what's going on in job growth in the whole economy. Based on the Bureau of Labor Statistics numbers. And what was really cool is Kevin Harrington was our head of research. This genius, crazy physics, biology, interesting guy who's and he ended up being on the National Security Council later. Super interesting, smart guy. And he had mapped out this thing I'd helped him with, where we realized that they were adjusting the numbers wrong based on seasonal adjustments. And so we were able to predict whether the number would hit or miss. And this thing would move bond markets like crazy, like hundreds of billions of dollars and move around based on this number. And we figured out they're systematically misdoing it. And this is totally legal. You're allowed to do this in finance. So we figured, okay, this is a mistake. 75% of the time we can make money trading this, and then we can adjust it and make it even better based on where the market was positioned. So if the market's going to be surprised, and we can kind of tell there's a good chance it might be, we take a big position, right, like the night before or whatever, and then make a ton of money that morning when it worked. And it was
at 4:30 in the morning,
with about 75% chance. And so you do it enough, you're going to do it well over time. And it was the most fun thing because we take these giant positions on this thing, and you'd be there with Peter and Kevin.
Is this just the high stakes game of
and
poker you've
ever
played?
It's the most fun high stakes game of poker, and you're literally personally have a few $1 million running on it at a time as early in my 20s. These guys, Peter probably had $100 million running on it every time, and you're high fiving if it goes right, or you're depressed if it goes wrong. Yeah. It's just most fun high stakes game of poker.
Global macro is more than finance. It's about understanding the world's economic pulse. Connecting mortgage-backed securities to global bond pricing shows how deep the analysis goes. It's about spotting patterns others miss, where a single insight can change everything. Every move feels like a crucial decision in this high-stakes game.
Sweating, or what's his demeanor
everyone's like, what's gonna happen? It's so exciting, and then and you're I remember so many celebrations. We'd all go to our favorite breakfast place afterwards if it worked out. It was pretty cool.
What'd you do if it didn't work out?
Sometimes we go there anyway. But for some reason in my mind, this is maybe who I am. I remember all these times it worked out. I barely can remember the times it didn't. I know it didn't sometimes, but maybe this is a serial entrepreneur sort of thing where you just see all the good memories,
Right.
Yeah, so it's but I remember it was a fun time.
That's an entrepreneur survival tactic.
You have to. You
block out the traumas.
All the traumas. It's too much.
Because if you remember how hard something is, you're much less likely to start it again or do another thing.
There's no freaking way I would have built all these companies if I had to force myself to think about that too much.
The way you just described the global macro fund, you're pretty young when you're doing this, and that's not what you were doing just before. So it's not like you had tons of experience.
My little brother got me reading a bunch of economics and finance stuff when I was young. So I kind of had a weird both computer science and finance background. So, and I had opinions about it. So that's so weird. Those are my two things. So so I knew that world pretty well. And you learn a lot being in it. You just do. You just have to be in it to do it.
The mindset of an entrepreneur is shaped by survival tactics like remembering only the wins. The willingness to forget the failures, or at least not dwell on them, is key to maintaining motivation and pushing through tough times. It's fascinating how the brain selectively remembers what fuels progress.
But credit to them for betting on you to be able to do that. They could have hired somebody who's been doing that for 20 years in New York.
We talk about lessons from Peter Thiel. I think one of the most important ones I've seen from him that I've definitely taken to heart in what I've done is I'd much rather hire for talent and ambition and hard work than hire for expertise. So almost, and there's exceptions, right? So if you have a company that's already really working and already really scaling, and there's like a machine that has to be run, you want to hire the guy who knows how to run the machine. That's fine. That's the operator who knows what they're doing already. But before you've actually built the machine, or when you're doing something with a group in like kind of high finance or whatever, you want to hire for raw IQ and hard work and just iterating and figuring it out. And that's a different skill set than the people who run the machines.
Hey, real quick, as you know, we're big on ideas here. We love bringing new ideas, business ideas, brainstorming ideas for the podcast. Well, a lot of people ask, what do you do with all those ideas? Can we go find them? Is there a list somewhere? The great people at HubSpot have put together a business ideas database. It's totally free. If you just click the link in the description below, you can go download a collection of over 50 plus business ideas that are from the archive, listed out for you, curated. And so what are you waiting for? Go download it. It's free. Check it out. It's in the description below. All right, back to the show.
What's your way of filtering for that IQ? How do you interview, or what are the signals you look for?
This is like super hard. I think you start with like
hard math problems at people. What are you doing?
We used to do that at Clarion. We had these really hard problems. I remember my friend Suji over at Dropbox, one of his partners there at his new ventures, Chen Li, was like the highest scorer on this test I gave. He's a smart guy. We had to do really hard tests. But once I already had around me a bunch of people who were really top talent, it's like they knew people like, oh, who is the smartest guy in your physics PhD at MIT? Who is, things like that. So it's like you kind of get a network that's already really solid, and then you go out from there.
The focus on hiring for IQ and hard work over experience is a fascinating approach, especially in a startup or high growth phase. It's about adaptability and potential, not just knowing how to run an established system. For anyone leading a company, the question is, do you build the system from scratch with visionaries or improve existing systems with operators?
And so let's go more on that. So two things. One, Ben told me something that there's some number, I don't know the exact number, 20, 30 people who have worked at your companies that have then gone on to start like unicorn companies. Dude, what is that number roughly?
Oh gosh, I don't actually keep track of the official number, but there's over 20 people who've worked directly for me who've started huge companies. And it's something I'm really proud of, is that we've had a lot of super talented people. And, in some ways it's like, I like to back my mind, like, oh yeah, I'm a great guy. I take credit for shaping them. But in some ways it's like, they were already really amazing. And so maybe I'm just good at convincing them to have worked with me ahead of time,
Right.
So it's like, there's
a nature nurture thing, right? So
there's some of both. I do like to think that we've given them useful frameworks, just like I learned from Peter. They might've learned some of these things from me too, but I mean, one of the ones, not all of them I've even backed. Like some of them I backed, some of them went off and then did it themselves. And
right,
which usually they let me back them. Though.
Yeah, yeah, that's the worst when you didn't get the call.
Actually, I'm still proud. I'm still proud of. Like I'll tell you, the guy who came right out of school to help run Adapar with me, and I was like, he became president of the company, super talented guy. And I did not know what I was doing, even though I just already done Palantir. There's all these mistakes I was making because there's like things I didn't realize I had advantages of Palantir. And Adapar's a multi-billion-dollar company now. It's great, but there's things that took longer. There's mistakes, but there's also obviously good things we did because the company worked out really well. And I think he had like one off on his own, and he had like his own tough time or whatever for a little while afterwards. And then he ended up partnering with someone, and he started a company that became worth $3 billion in like 4 years, and he sold it.
Wow.
Which I'm like, oh wow, that's pretty fucking cool.
Yeah.
So but I was like, and they didn't bring anyone else into that company, but I was still really proud of the fact that I'd worked with this guy, right, and then he'd gone on and had like crazy success. I mean, it's a cool feeling, Right.
What resonates deeply is the sentiment around the importance of shaping people through experience rather than just knowledge. It reminds me of the fact that there are so many factors that contribute to success: timing, connections, and perseverance, all layered with the right environment for growth. Joe mentions that a lot of his former employees have gone on to great things, even those he didn't personally back after they left. It's clear that the leadership environment he created helped build that foundation of self-confidence and autonomy, which is essential for anyone building a company. Even the story about the individual who went on to create a $3 billion company shows how leaders can pass on valuable frameworks to their teams. But ultimately, it's about the individuals taking the initiative and applying what they've learned in their own unique ways. The satisfaction of watching someone you've worked with reach new heights, even if they didn't keep you involved, is a rare and fulfilling experience. It shows that true leadership isn't about holding on to people, but about empowering them to succeed on their own.